So, the GR in 2023. I want to say this camera is like 3 or 4 years old, and it is now becoming a bit of a, what's the right word, like a novelty piece. I feel like the Fujifilm X100V has blown up on TikTok, and the idea of a point and shoot is kind of taken off. And I imagine that there are a lot of other point and shoot type of cameras that are also doing well. So the issue that I have is one, the GR is not like the Fujifilm X100, other than the fact that it is a fixed lens camera. So if I'm not against Fujifilm, I'm not trying to negatively compare the two, but I will say this, the Ricoh, the GR, is its own shooting experience. Whereas the X100 series really feels like the X Pro series of camera with a fixed lens. The lens is not really compact, it's a fairly bulky camera. So if you're coming from the place of, having a professional interchangeable lens camera, the X100 series really isn't that different. I mean, it's less bulk because typically speaking, you have a ton of different lenses with you when you're doing a professional type of shoot, and you wouldn't on there maybe save for a couple of batteries, which I think is a case with any time that you have a point and shoot type of camera. It tends to be that because they're smaller, they have less battery life. There's less room for battery. The big difference I would say with the GR is that you do not have a general camera experience with the idea of you have a fixed lens. The GR is its own shooting experience. It is minimalism to the extreme, which I think, resonates with some people. However, there are definitely going to be things that you do not get with the GR that a lot of people take for granted. So one, I'm doing this video on the GR, and the video quality is, it's kind of whatever. As someone who is a professional, the camera only functions in program mode at 1080 with a very old sensor. The video quality that you are getting with this is not great. It's not ideal. It's not professional grade, yet for an instructional piece like this, I think it's adequate. I mean, I feel like you're still getting an image of me. You're still getting the audio quality, or an audio track. So I'm able to convey my message here that you're able to receive. So for that, thing, it does function. I think for me, when I look at the boost or the boom of the point and shoot camera market, which has largely been considered dead for a number of years, and I think a large part of that had to do with the notion that the point and shoots that were being made with the same sensors that are in smartphones. And yeah, you get a zoom lens, but realistically, the sensors that are going in smartphones are better. And what you're getting is computational photography in phones. And it's just an easier experience. That why do you need to have, this other thing that you take with you? And then the image quality is crap, and they're kind of expensive, and they were really cutting the quality as the price was going down. So like, you spend $400 or $500 on this camera and it breaks, and it's not any better than a cell phone, so why not just take the cell phone that you have? But I also think that as Instagram is becoming more and more popular, and as we are becoming more cognizant of media as a lifestyle, I think that people are starting to understand the limitations of those cameras, that you can't replace a professional real camera with real glass and do that. So I think the idea that, like, well, if I'm going to be a social media person, if I'm going to kind of look at this as a career, which I think has happened largely in part with COVID, a lot of people are looking for other forms of income, starting their own business, working online, things of that nature, you need some sort of social media. You need to put yourself out there. So the idea of a point and shoot as a one-stop media producer that can produce higher quality than a smartphone makes a lot of sense. Where I think you start having a problem is thinking about it from the standpoint of the GR being that. I feel like in some cases, when you think of, the X100 series, if you want something small to be your entire media, whatever, yes. The GR to me really it what makes it so special is how small it is. How little there is to it and the design philosophies therein. So, it literally has one singular focus and mission. You have a 28 millimeter lens, which is fairly wide. It's an intermediate. I will say this, like when you look at the GR scope, you have a 21, a 28, a 40, and I want to say it's like a 65 or 70. So, if you compare that as like 21 is your ultra wide, well, typically speaking, for an ultra wide, what you really want is like a 16 or a 24, depending on, how you view that. Typically speaking, what happens with ultra wides is you have the ultra wide zoom, typically the 16 to 30, 35, something like that, depending on make and model. So 21 actually harkens back to the older lenses that were coming back out in the 70s and 80s, where 20 really was your wide angle. Like, wide angle is kind of a modern lens that we don't think of. So the fact that you have this throwback to a 20 as your wide, that's weird. Then you have 28, which is also a throwback in and of itself, because the modern equivalency is the 35. Like, that's kind of become the new norm for that kind of like wide but not ultra wide. So it's just a weird thing. Then the next one up is typically the 50. You don't get a 50 here, you get a 40. So it's a little bit wider, not as focused. And then typically, it's really funny because the old actually used to be like, when I think of like the portrait, the telephoto portrait, I think of a 135. Nowadays, it's turned into the 85. And the fact that, the GR is now offering a 70, what it does is it allows for just a little bit different. You also are not getting the super fast lenses of like what you would get on the Leicas, or I think Sony makes one. I think it's like the R2 or R1 or something along those lines. And then you have the Canon line, which I don't put any stock into. Those are really it. And the GR is weird in the sense that like you're getting a much wider angle of view, but at the same time, you're only getting 2.8. You're not looking for the blown out backgrounds, which is modern photography. It's a much more retro feel of photography, but what you do get with the GR is how sharp it is. It is one of the sharpest lenses ever, and if you go back to the GR2 as opposed to the GR3, you get much more micro contrast in the two. So the difference between micro contrast and sharpness, you can argue on which one that you want. And what's interesting about the lens design of the GR3 versus the 2 is, yes, you're getting much more micro contrast in the 2, but the problem is because you have the lens that's going out and going in, you're getting dust in, and there's no way to get that off the sensor. There's some problems there. Whereas on the 3, you have the IBIS unit, which is allowing to get both dust off the sensor, but also if you're doing street photography at night, you can get much slower shutter speed. So, you have full control. You're having, not shallow depth of field, so everything's in focus, but it's really sharp. It's really the ideal street photography camera. But in doing so, it changes how you think of things, how you form photography, how you interact with subjects, how you interact with workflow. Like, to work with a GR is to completely encompass that into your workflow. Now, I know a lot of people who, because of its pocketability, will have it as a B or C camera because it's really easy to take with you, or you're not going to necessarily be taking your big interchangeable kit lens with you everywhere that you go, whereas the GR, it's very possible to just have that live in your pocket, and if there's ever a scene or a good lighting thing or you're inspired, you can take it out. And I kind of started my GR journey doing exactly that, like having it just kind of with me and using it as a B or C camera. And what I really started to appreciate more and more is I liked that shooting experience better than I did with the other camera. And what I also, started to appreciate is the little mistakes and nuances of life. Like it's a very vibrant, living thing to have with you and in your art, and it shows up. And wherever you're at, whatever it is, you're just I feel like the images that I'm getting, because it's with you all the time and it doesn't feel as postured or prepared as a different camera, you end up like just your entire way of shooting changes. It's a different way of thinking. Um, you're not super fixated on focusing on something. You're not trying to blur things out to where you're making whatever. It's you're trying to encompass a larger frame. So, when we're talking about the different types of things, it's not the super wide where you're trying to get everything perfect. It's a little bit more focused on a subject at 20, or actually in this case 21. At 28, it's not the 35 where you're blowing up to a person, you're trying to blow the background out. At 28, you're still encompassing a person in their element. The element and the person meld together. At 40, you're still focusing on a face or on a subject, but you're also getting more of the background. So like you're always melding those two things, and the same is true at 65. It's not just like a super close-up. It's much more of the idea that you're not separating subject and background. You're melding the idea of environment and subject together at all times. And because it's always with you, you're also interacting more with that. It's a very different way of thinking. The problems with the cameras, like I said, the video quality is what it is. The IBIS unit for what it is. So one of the things with the there being so much sharpness is they had to get rid of elements to the lens to make room for the IBIS, because there's, when you put an IBIS in, you have to take other things out. They took the flash out, which a lot of people complain about. I don't so much care about the flash. I feel like the IBIS offsets that enough. But the IBIS unit in video means you can't really move with the camera because the IBIS unit shakes. And that quality alone sounds like a negative, but what it means is you can't move the camera very much because the IBIS kind of goes off. And, normally you'd say that's a bad thing, but long takes, like the idea that I can't, do moving, more dynamic type of video means that you're stuck with me. You get a feel for me. You get a feel like you're here for better or worse. It's a much more granola organic experience, which, for better or worse is up to your perspective. But that idea melds into the camera. So, I feel like it's an interesting idea of what exactly a GR is. It's a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, which isn't the best. Like even I don't think it's the best at 24 megapixels. It's definitely not the best at APS-C. I mean, they make 26, 32. Now we're up to 40 megapixel sensors at that. And this is a very old. Like if you were going to pick up a interchangeable lens camera with this sensor, you'd be mad. You'd be very mad. Now that's not to say it doesn't have good dynamic range or problem, or that it doesn't produce good color or anything like that. It's very beautiful for one thing, but it's very slow. Like when the frames per second is really like it's way slower than it should be. The rolling shutter on this, if you're trying to do video, or I don't even think you can do silent shooting on this. Not that the shutter is very loud with this, but my point is that like for a lot of technical things, this is not the best. It's taking the bare minimum to focus on one thing, and that one thing is you're going to get super sharp, low noise, relatively high megapixel, high quality images anywhere and everywhere. You're going to get a shutter Mac that you can sync if you want to at very high speeds. And you're going to be able to carry that with you wherever you go. And, it's an interesting experience even filming this video because I can't see myself. There's no flip screen. I set up the thing in generally what I thought was a good general direction at me. I took a test video or a test picture to kind of see what it would look like. And I'm shooting blind. I mean, for all I know, it stopped recording, or there was a malfunction or a problem, and I have no clue. So there is less of a feeling that I'm constantly checking, like because like on a professional shoot, like you have a screen that you're looking at and lighting and equipment, and this is much more organic. Like it's much less about the other things, and it's just here is this thing, this piece of equipment that's very small and it doesn't interfere very much in life. And that thing is recording life. It's not changing it very much. Like it's the idea, and this is very true. If you show up to a wedding, and I've done weddings before, and you've got a small camera, people look at you and they're like, oh, you're not a professional. But you show up with a big camera and everyone wants to pose. And it's the whole idea of like you're posing for the camera because the camera feels special because it's big. And like people don't know what the camera does or the functions or anything else. To a layman, you've got a big lens and a big camera and they want the spotlight on them so they can pose for it. And I feel like the GR is to take the camera out of the equation as much as possible and record life. And that's it. I'm not saying there's not a lot of technical marvelry in this, like the amount of programmability, the amount of user settings, and all that. It's there. Snap focus is amazing. Like there's all the technical things I can get to, but when I think about why is the GR so prevalent now, I think it's largely the idea that you want something that can be your social media connection with you, that kind of replaces a phone. I think we inherently know that phones are not good enough for what most people want to do when they're interacting with social media. Two, interchangeable lens systems are a drag. They're a lot to contend with. So people are going, I think, back to the compact, to the small, I just have the one thing that I take with me everywhere that I go. I'm not so sure that the GR just is like, oh, it's fine, because the Fujifilm, which we were just talking about, like the X-T10 is doing well, and that's a crap camera. So I feel like the fact that it's even doing well just means that people are going towards that. But I think even beyond that, there's the GR, and the GR is special because, like I said, it is the least camera you can get, and it's very proficient. It takes great quality, but it tries to remove itself from the situation, whereas I feel like the Fujifilm is very much about what it is. I feel like the GR is very much about what it isn't, and it really depends on you whether or not that works for you or not.